Hey, I'm David Adelsheim. The story of Adelsheim Vineyard began in 1971. That was the year that Ginny and I decided to risk our life savings on a piece of property in Oregon's North Willamette Valley. Looking back now, we were one of just 10 families that made wine before 1980 from grapes planted on our properties in that region. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of what became our first vineyard, we wanted to tell our story. But we quickly realized that the only way to truly tell our story was to tell the stories of that entire first generation. Our winery team proposed an idea, a series of video conversations with the founders of those first 10 wineries and me. I loved it and set to work contacting my old friends. In each interview, we wanted to go beyond their widely known histories to discover who these people really were and what led them to build our uniquely collaborative, and at least from today's perspective, incredibly successful wine industry. This is our shared story. Vuylsteke was working at Tektronix and teaching others to be home winemakers in the late 1960s. Marj was selling wine at Wine Art and bringing up their 6 kids. Their friends encouraged them to start making wine commercially. So in 1970, they purchased an old 40 by 120-foot cow barn, which became Oak Knoll Winery. They were making fruit into wine later that summer, and by 1973, they had added wine grapes and became immersed in the growing wine industry. We talked with Ron and Marj at that original property on November 12th, 2020. Ron, it's great to see you here. I haven't been in this winery in a long time, and it's great to be reminded of what humble beginnings we all had back in the days of the 1970s. I wanted to go back even before you had this building. You were making wine. What I want to know is, when you were growing up, did your family make wine?
Well, I didn't know when I started making wine in the early 60s, because we had a bumper crop in this big garden we have with all kinds of fruit and berries, etc., that after I started making wine, my dad said, "Did you know that your grandfather was a winemaker?" I said, "No, I did not know that." And my father was born in 1900 and in a little town west of Bordeaux, and my grandfather was a shoemaker. And when my dad was 7 years old in 1907, my grandfather bought 10 hectares of vineyard in Saint-Emilion and became the village winemaker.
Wow.
And he was the winemaker there until in 1914 they moved to Belgium to get away from the First World War.
Yeah.
So there must have been a gene that popped out in me from my grandfather.
Once you were born and came on the scene, your father wasn't serving wine all the time? I mean...
No, not at all. We very seldom had any alcohol at all in the house. So it was, in the early 60s when I started making wine, it was a new deal.
Did you grow up in the Hillsborough area?
I was born and raised in Forest Grove, went to high school there, and then later went to the University of Portland for a couple of years before I went into the Army, and then got out of that and went to work for Tektronix. And
with the training that you got from the Army, I presume.
Yes, right. Yeah. Yes, I was a radio repairman in the Army.
So you were at Tektronix, and there was some sort of an amateur wine club, or?
Well, in the early 60s, there was very little amateur winemaking going on, and this couple brought this company called Wine Art into Portland, and it was an amateur wine supply house. And Ann McCallum, the owner, called me and said, "Ron, you make great wine. Why don't we start a wine club?" So we did. The first meeting was held, I think it was in 1962 or 63. Wow. And we had a lot of people, that went through that wine club that later became part of the industry.
Okay,
like Dick Erath and Ron Johnson from Adelsheim Vineyards, they were members of our club.
Yeah. You made your first wine when you had a bumper crop in the garden.
Yes.
Of some sort of fruit, or
it was a blackberry wine. Yes, and it turned out pretty good.
And what year was that? Do you figure?
I believe it was in 1962.
62.
Yeah.
And that was before Wine Art and the Ann McCallum thing.
Yes, right.
So you started. You made wine that was not disgusting.
Yes.
And
well, we called it a low gag factor.
What took you from that to Ann McCallum hiring you? Did you just make a little bit more and a little bit different wine every year for a while?
I started experimenting about different wines, everything from any type of berry, blackberry, loganberry, even gooseberry, dandelion wine, rhubarb, just about anything that would.
And you had gone to college to learn about all this, right?
No, there was no college to learn that, believe me. When I started, I went to the library and found these books that were mainly from England, and I knew that you didn't use bread yeast to make wine, so there was definitely a learning process for me, and I experimented a lot with how to make fruit and berry wine, and because the berry wines have a higher acid and a lower sugar, so it takes a bit of amelioration and adding sugar to make the proper alcohol and make it a palatable product.
Why were you doing this?
Well, I was still working at Tektronix, so it was it was a hobby thing. And then in the late 60s, my neighbor also worked at Tektronix, and he said, "Ron, you make great wine. Why don't we start a winery?" I said, "Well, yeah, we could probably do that." So we started looking and found this building. It used to be called Burkhalter Dairy. It's an old dairy barn, a milking barn. It's 40 by 210 feet, well-insulated building. So we bought the building, and that's how Oak Knoll Winery started.
And up to that point, you were making home wine, in essence,
home wine,
hobby
yes.
wine,
yeah. And
people that were tasting it were telling you, "This is good enough, you should be selling this."
That's right. They said, "Yeah, can we buy a bottle?" I said, "No, you can't do that, because I would get busted by the feds in the state on that." So I gave away a lot of wine, though. So,
and it's my understanding that the Wine Art Wine Club started before you bought this building. Is that right?
Yes, definitely.
And you needed a winery license at Wine Art in order to do that club?
Well, as an amateur wine back in those days, yes, you needed a federal permit to make amateur wine. It was ridiculous in my estimation, but wow. I had to get this permit from the BATF saying that I was making amateur wine. I don't think it was very well enforced, but yeah.
There wasn't a lot of tax dollars being
That's
lost.
Right. There was no tax involved. So.
You buy this 40 by 220 foot barn.
Yeah.
What made you think that this could be a winery?
Well, we thought that it was, we looked at a lot of different properties, and this one had a building that the walls were hollow clay tile. We could insulate the ceiling, and it was just a well-built building. It took a lot of tearing out the old stanchions that they used to milk the cows in, and filling up the gutters with concrete, etc. And even the mangers were in concrete, so we covered those up to allow us to put barrels and tanks into the building. Yeah.
So, as I get it, it's a very long building, and
Yes.
and the furthest away from here is where the grapes or the fruit was received.
Fruit and grapes, yes.
And then the middle third was kind of where tanks were and fermentation.
Tank room, yeah.
And then this is the barrel room.
This is the barrel room, correct.
And has this changed radically since the late 60s?
Oh, yes, it has. It was all open. There was no walls at all. It was one long building, and we made a lot of mistakes in this building because we bought a lot of redwood tanks, which really were not good for this type of wine that we were making, especially the varietal wines, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, etc. So those left. We bought stainless tanks. That's what we're using now. So
You're making home wine from fruit and berry, then you're making commercial wine from fruit and berry. I mean, the first wine you made in 1970
yes.
were from berries and fruits.
Yes, right.
Were
yes.
what was being grown in the area.
Right, correct. We would contract or buy from local growers. They would bring it in the flats, and we would crush it, make the wine, yes.
Was it in your mind that you would move from fruit and berry to vinifera grapes, or was that the furthest thing from your mind?
No, absolutely. That was right. That was number one in my mind. As a matter of fact, my first wine that I made out of vinifera varietal wine was in 1971. A Zinfandel that we bought. We found this little vineyard just west of the Dalles.
Yeah, very famous vineyard. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
and we bought 5 tons of Zinfandel and made that wine. And our little wine press over in the other building, a small little wine press, was the only press we had. It took us about a day and a half to press that 5 tons out after it was fermented. But it turned out pretty good. And just recently, a guy told me, he said, I just enjoyed one of your old wines, a 1971 Zinfandel. And he said, surprisingly, it was very good. I said, wow, that's a really an old one.
You knew about wine when you were starting up. I mean, you didn't know just about fruit wine.
Yes.
Were you and Marj then drinking vinifera wines from various places?
Yes, we would enjoy a bottle of wine mainly with meals. And when I started making amateur wine, I was also buying wine, enjoying some of the vinifera wines like Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Chardonnay, Riesling. So we got acquainted with that, and that piqued my interest, I think, in what I wanted to do with a winery, not just make fruit and berry wines, but all types of wine. My total thing was a wine for every palate.
So I assume that you bought this place, converted it, and made wine in 1970 without having met any of the other people in the wine industry at that point.
That's about it, yes. No, I knew Dick Erath.
Because you worked at Tektronix together.
We worked at Tektronix together.
Yeah.
We spent many coffee breaks talking about making wine. So, and I even helped Dick plant his first vineyard up where he pulled out all those walnut trees,
yeah.
And at a coffee break up there, or a wine break, or a beer break, I guess it was, planting those vineyards, Dick said, he says, this old walnut orchard, he says, I guess I should call my winery Chateau Walnetto. They're a little levity and all that stuff. So, but we helped a lot of people get started in the industry.
You obviously, at Tektronix, had the acquaintance with Dick Erath. There was the beginnings in the very late 60s of this group of vinifera people who were meeting and worrying about infected grapevines and other issues. When did you start being part of that organization?
Right from the beginning, David. My house was kind of centrally located, so a lot of the meetings were held in my living room. And
that was on this property,
On
right?
this property, right,
Yeah.
yes. And so it was centrally located where we met to decide where we were going with this industry that nobody thought was going to take off at all, as we know. But you know, there was a lot of those early days when we wanted to make sure that Oregon wines, vinifera wines especially, meant something. And we wanted to have an organization that we would think would promote not only the actual wine itself, but the research, and that would make the wines better. So we wanted to start an organization, but we wanted to call it the Oregon Wine Growers Association, but the people down in south in Roseburg had already taken that name. So we decided on a name called the Wine Growers Council of Oregon. And it was an organization, a professional organization. You had to be either a winery owner, winemaker, or a vineyard owner to even be a member. And they even said, well, Ron, you're that fruit and berry guy. I said, but I made that Zinfandel. They said, okay, you're in. But we also looked at other things like a commodity commission. We thought, well, this would be one way to get an organization going. We contacted Oregon State, and this guy named Jay Glatt was the guy that handled all of the commodity commissions. We met with him for about an hour down at Oregon State, and he determined that we didn't have enough tax revenue to even pay for the postage to start a commodity commission. So we gave up that idea. But later, we did so many good things as the Wine Growers Council of Oregon. We didn't know that we had such clout with like the legislature and the governor of Oregon, good old Vic Tia, really helped us a lot in like establishing the wine advisory board, taxing ourselves, also taxing people that was shipping wine into our state for the promotion and research that we needed to become an industry that we have come now.
Yeah, I mean, the Table Wine Research Advisory Board was the result of us lobbying. It came into effect in 1977, and
correct.
You
yes.
were obviously part of that. I know I was involved.
I was the original member of the board, Wine Advisory Board. I spent 8 years on that board.
Yeah.
And I spent many more years on the board of the Wine Growers, or the Oregon Wine Growers Association.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of travel, a lot of expense, but that we bore together to build an industry that we're damn proud of living.
Were there other members of the industry who you worked particularly closely with in those years, or was it kind of whoever was involved?
I think it was pretty much involved with everybody. It was such a small industry that everybody knew everybody. But I think probably that I should give credit to a group of people that just had vineyards, like Ron Johnson at Dion Vineyards, Jerry Preston that started Amity Vineyards. I helped him plant vineyards up there too, my sons and I. And let's see, who else? There's Bob McRitchie.
Oh yeah,
no. Bill Barron. Some of these grape growers, they were just growing grapes. They were not thinking of starting a winery. So those are the people that kept me going. Ron Johnson, I bought every grape that he grew for about the first 25 years. And it was interesting because we never, I don't think we ever signed a contract with Dion Vineyards. It was a handshake, and a lot of the times we didn't even discuss price of what we were paying for the grapes until we tasted the wine to see what they were like. So that's the type of relationships that we had between a grower and a winery.
And you've never, I mean, you planted a few grapes around this building,
right?
Not the greatest vineyard site, but almost everything that you've made has been from grapes that you purchased from other people.
That's correct, yes.
And were there some advantages, and were there any disadvantages to that?
I think the advantage is that I could pick and choose where the grapes came from, and a lot of times I would not get committed to a vineyard until I tried maybe a ton of Pinot Noir or Chardonnay to see what kind of character that particular vineyard had. And throughout our early days, we always kept these individual vineyards separate to see what kind of character they were. And then the real art was then coming up with maybe one or two wines. As you know, the blending is just the art that can really make you or break you. You know?
Right, right.
So, but as far as a vineyard myself, no. When I started, I thought, I'm going to put all my effort into making the best wine that I can make. I'm going to buy the grapes and make the wine. And I feel that it's a full-time job, making and marketing wine. Let the vineyard grower do what he does, I'll do what I do.
I know at the very beginning, once you bought this cow barn, you still needed to get it licensed. And Washington County had no idea what to do with you.
Well, yes, I applied for my liquor license with the OLCC, and they said, well, first, fine, but you'll have to go through the county first to get their approval. So I went to the county, and they gave me the land use board, and they said, well, let's see, the only thing that we have that is even close to a winery is a brewery, and that has to be on an industrial property. I said, well, I'm sorry, but what I'm doing is taking an agricultural product, processing it for loose. It's like similar to like a prune dryer. A prune dryer takes his prunes, puts them through a dryer, and sells them. That's exactly what we were doing. So I requested to go before the Washington County Commissioners and pleaded my case, and they approved giving me a 5-year conditional use permit, which I had to renew every 5 years for about 25 years, till I finally asked them if I could get a permanent, which they allowed. So
by then they had a winery license.
Yes, and they had a winery license. So I set a precedent in Washington County that a lot of wineries should thank me for.
Was part of the original problem that you didn't have grapes here? Because Ponzi didn't have as much trouble as you did, because they were doing their winery at their vineyard.
Yes, right. I think that was the main problem, that I was not growing grapes. But it said again, it was like the prune dryer. You could have a prune dryer that's not, you're buying prunes from individuals. They need to sell their product somewhere, and that allows them to. And I also stated that there are vineyards going in right as we speak, when I was talking to the Washington County Commissioners, that are needing a place for their grapes to be processed. And I said, that's me. So they agreed, thank goodness.
One of the most intriguing aspects of the Vuylsteke family is you had 6 kids.
Yes.
And every one of them has ended up working in a winery at one time or another, and a couple of them have been in the business for 30 or 40 years at this point.
Correct, yes.
Did you extract blood from them, or how did this happen? I mean, there's no other family that's done that.
Must have been the genes again from my grandfather, which would have been their great-grandfather. But yes, son Ron Jr. winemaker down at Tudor Vineyards in the Napa Valley. Steve.
You worked for my partner, for Eugenia, for a while too, at Boucher.
Right, yes. He worked a number of places around Oregon before he took off for California. Son John worked here for many years, got out of the business. Son Steve was president here for a while, and couldn't see eye to eye with his father, so he decided to leave, as things do happen. And he went to work and was the general manager for Dick Erath for a number of years, almost 20 years. And when Dick sold, my son Steve became president of Sake One in Forest Grove. So he's still in the, I guess, wine business.
Yeah, he didn't go very far from
No, not at all, not at all. So, yes, my sons are definitely, and son Doug spent a lot of time at Rex Hill and also cellar master at Sokol Blosser for a number of years. And when he was at Rex Hill, Lynn Penrash talked to me one time, and she said, thank you for allowing me to work with your son Doug. He sure taught me a lot of how to make Oregon Pinot Noir.
Wow.
Yeah, that was quite a compliment.
You know, we've been talking here, Ron, for a couple of minutes, and my throat is actually pretty dry.
Mine is getting that way too, David. Yeah. I could use a little sip of some of that good red stuff there.
So when you started making vinifera wine, that was in 73, was it?
71 was the Zinfandel.
Oh, when you made the Zinfandel, right.
But my first Pinot Noir was in 73.
That's right, yeah.
Total disaster. We've all had those, haven't we?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I got the grapes from a vineyard out of Sweet Home, Oregon. The vineyard was at 1,300 elevation.
Oh, yeah. That'll get ripe sometime next year.
That's exactly right. It made a nice rosé, if that. The 74 was our first vintage from Nyon Vineyards, and it was a lot better because it was come from about 1.5 miles down the road. And the 74 and 75, that was before I had a malolactic bug in my winery, so we were looking at getting acids as low as we could. And I remember Ron Johnson bringing in the 75 Pinot. It was 22 sugar and 0.75 acid, almost perfect. And it was made just a perfect wine. And likewise the 76, which we have a bottle right here. Yeah, that was, again, the epitome of what Ron Johnson and I were trying to do.
Well, 76 was a really good vintage on top of that. So
that's for sure, yes. We had a couple of real nice vintages right in there. I think it was 77, I bought some used barrels they said from Lafitte Rothschild, but I don't know where they came from. But I got a malolactic bug in my winery that just won't quit. And ever since then, I've had no problem with making Pinot Noir, even though the acid's a little high, so we can mellow it with the malolactic ferment, yes.
Well, this isn't doing any good in the glass.
I know. Here's to us, David.
Yeah,
You betcha.
indeed, Ron.
Not too bad.
Not indeed. That's lovely. From those early years where we were having to build an industry together, what part of that was critical to the success of Oak Knoll? Was it the marketing work?
You can make the best wine in the world, but if nobody buys it, you're in trouble. So marketing is really, really very important. Those early days, when I was doing my marketing myself, I would go out and contact wine shops, small grocery stores, etc., and take their orders and load up my truck. I'd call them on Monday, take their order, load up my pickup, and deliver it myself. I was marketing, winemaker marketing, a little bit of everything at those days. So that's how we got things going. In the late 70s, early 80s, I contacted Safeway, and they were very interested in my fruit wines, and that's really what got us going. We would bring pallets of raspberry, loganberry, blackberry to their stores and put it in all their stores in the state. That's what got Oak Knoll going.
So for a period of time, was it the fruit wines that were supporting your vinifera habit?
Absolutely, yes, right. They allowed us to buy barrels, buy grapes, because with fruit wines, there's really no lag time. You make it one day or 1 week or a month and you sell it, where vinifera wine takes a little longer, as we all know, reds especially.
Yeah.
You know, it's a year and a half, 2 years before you're selling it. So it's an investment. And at that time, the fruit and berry were really keeping us in business, you might say.
So in those early years, you were making a lot of fruit and berry wine once you had the contract with Safeway.
Yes, right.
When did the vinifera wines, the grape wines, exceed the fruit wines?
Probably in the late 80s, I would say, you know, when we started getting some, you know, the late 70s, early 80s, we started getting some notoriety about our wines. And one of the things that really kind of made my day was when I got a call from Robert Duran, and he came to my winery, and I did a vertical tasting of my Pinot Noirs from 70, I think it was 79 to 83. He gave me the best compliment a winemaker could ever get. He said, Ron, he said, if I didn't know better, I would be in the cellars of Burgundy tasting these wines. Maybe I had a little bit to do with him coming over here, starting a vineyard and a winery. I think I would like to think that anyhow.
You certainly didn't scare him away.
No, we did not. No, not at all. No. And he was here with his wife and daughter Veronique, who takes care of the winery here for Robert.
Yep.
So those are the things that really make your day when you're trying to do something like we are, David, you know.
Right. Over the years, the winery has grown, certainly to a level. I know even in the mid-'80s, the wines were being sold around the country. Mm-hmm. The ownership, or not the ownership, the management has evolved as you step back from active duty, if you will. When did that happen?
I think it was in the later 80s. Had a little problem with the marital thing with my wife. The wine business is difficult on a lot of marriages, believe me.
I maybe know what you're talking about.
Working together so closely, it can be real dynamite. So I think it was '88. I turned the presidency over to my son Steve, and he ran the company for about, I think, 17 years before he left and went with ERAF. So that was a little bit of change.
Wine in that
but
period?
I was still chairman of the board and winemaker. I oversaw every bit of winemaking, and also hired my cousin, Jeff Herrings. He and my mother were first cousins, so Jeff and I are second cousins. And he came in as a cellar worker, became very interested in winemaking, and he became the assistant winemaker, and he is now the winemaker here at Oak Knoll.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did you really stop having the role of winemaker?
About when I retired about 14 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about
I think it was
2006?
2006,
Yeah.
yes, right.
As you look back over what is really a very long period of time, what are the accomplishments of Oak Knoll that you are most proud of?
Whoa, boy, there could be quite a list there.
Well, good.
No, probably one of the highlights of our early days was, I believe it was in 1985 or 86, we entered our raspberry wine and our 83 Pinot Noir Vintage Reserve into the State Fair. We took top prize for both wines. At that time, it was called the Governor's Trophy. Then that was one of the high points. It just made my day, you might say, because again, I've always had that stigma of being the fruit and berry guy, but I think I changed a lot of opinions on that when I took top honors.
And that would have been in '86. Was Victor Tia still governor? Did he present you those governor awards?
I don't think he actually did it. It was a governor's award,
But it was secondary.
But that very same tasting or judging, one of the judges was Andrei Chelyshev, the winemaker of Vuylsteke Vineyards, one of the premier winemakers of all time, I believe, as far as California is concerned. Yeah. He was one of the judges. He called me the next day because he had to leave and didn't know whose wine it was. He found out and he called me and he said, "Ron," he said, "in searching for the ultimate Pinot Noir for the last 50 years, he said, this one is near the top." What a accolade.
Yeah,
again, made my day.
Yeah.
So those are things that you remember a lot, you know. The thing that I need to really convey is the cooperation we had in those early days. I remember getting a call, I can't remember the year, but it was right near the end of Crush, and I got a call from Pat Campbell from Elko Vineyards, and she said, "Ron," she said, "my husband Joe's at work," and he said, "I've got this tank of Riesling that it's just, the temperature's going up, my refrigeration system has failed, could you help me?" I said, "You got it." I got in my truck and immediately went up there, got my toolbox and found that it had a blown fuse. I replaced the fuse, got her going. Those are the things that we talk about. Yeah. Or we should talk about, because that was the type of cooperation that we had. And you, David, coming over here and looking at my Kreischer stemmer saying, "Ron, get rid of that must pump. You're chewing up seeds." Those are the things that what we were trying to do was help each other make the best wines, because if there's a bad wine out there, it's going to reflect on the old industry.
Well, and frankly, nobody was making so much wine that we weren't each other's competitors.
There was no competition, right? Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a trying time, but a great time to see the thing grow like it has. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah. As you look back on the 70s and 80s, did you see a regionalization in Washington County as compared to Yamhill County? Were there meetings of Washington County wineries without the Yamhill County people, or was it so small that we always mixed?
I don't think there was any real schism between the two counties. The Yamhill County Association really didn't fit it to a lot of people in Washington County, so they didn't join that type of organization. That was the only thing that I could see.
Yeah, and it took them a while for the Yamhill County Wine Growers, or whatever it was called, to become the Willamette Valley.
Right,
when it made sense.
Yeah, right, agreed.
Yeah.
But the Washington County, I think, kind of congealed because I think it was a lot because the Washington County Wives Association did a lot for promoting just Washington County rather than a regional type thing, so, which was a good thing. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you for taking a cold afternoon to talk with us in this amazing old building that has so much history behind it.
It sure does. After 50 years of winemaking in this building, you know, it's still going, you know. We're still making wine, selling a little, you know. Competition is, as you know, really tough out there nowadays with all the new wineries in. But I think to end this, David, I think you and I had no idea what type of things that we had started when, I think 5 guys, there was you, myself, Dick Erath, Dick Ponzi, and Dave Lett. We got to add Chuck Corey in there too, because he was part of that original group that really started this whole North Willamette thing that became Oregon wine. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Certainly. It's hard to point out who was more important, who was less important, because we were all. It was kind of moving. I mean, on land use, Bill Blosser was important, and on technical things, Chuck Corey often led the charge, and so.
No, it was a unified thing between like 5 or 6 guys that really unified and made what we have today with the legislation, with the rules about labeling, all these things really added up to be what we have today and passed on to not our children, but you know, what Oregon wine is today.
Yeah, yeah.
One of my grape growers, Bill Barron, decided to make his own wine. And so he crushed his first Pinot Noir and aged it in French oak barrels like he should have, done a great job. He bottled it, and he brought a bottle down here, and he said, Ron, he said, something's wrong with this wine. We opened it up, and I tasted it, and I go, whoa, I think we got a little H2S in there. I got a penny out of my pocket and dropped it in the glass and swirled it around. I said, here, Bill, smell that. He said, oh my God, that went right. Whoa.
The magic of putting a penny in a glass of wine.
Yeah, right. So I told him about Blue Finding, and he did that, saved that vintage. That's how we cooperate back in those days.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point about people helping each other. I mean, in my early days, my winemaking teacher was Bob McRitchie at Sokol Blosser, because he was the one with the PhD in microbiology and knew what he was doing, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I'm sure that you served that function because you had so many years of practical winemaking under your belt.
That's exactly it. I had nobody like you had Bob McRitchie. I had nobody.
Yeah.
You know, well, Dick Erath but he was an amateur winemaker too.
Yeah, I mean, he was not ahead of you.
No, not at all. Another little thing that happened that kind of made my day was being known as that fruit and berry guy. I developed a lot of interesting ideas about sugar to acid balance in wines. And I played that really good in my berry wines because the acid is high, and if you're going to dilute it out with water, you'll lose all the flavor. So I would leave the acid high and then balance that with the sugar or sweetness, and it really brought out some of the characters of those fruit and berry wines. But I was asked after bringing a few of those berry wines down to the Napa Valley and letting a few people taste them, they thought, my God, these are just perfect, super wines. And the extension agent at UC Davis asked me if I'd give a seminar on berry wines. So I did. I gave it about an hour seminar, and there were a lot of the high-end California winemakers there. So it was kind of interesting to see that their interest in something like that.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you told me on the phone recently that making fruit or berry wine is a completely different process than making wine from grapes.
It's completely different technology, like look at the structure of a raspberry or a blackberry. There's very little juice, but lots of seeds. If you ferment that on those seeds, you're going to get a lot of tannins out of there. So what I've learned is that to extract the juice, it's almost impossible just to crush and press it. But if you freeze the fruit, it breaks the cellular structure and allows the juice to just flow. And we use rice hulls as a press aid to allow us to get the juice out without getting too much contact with those seeds, making a big difference in the final product.
Yeah. Wow.
So those are just little nuances that I've learned through trial and error, you might say. So it's very interesting.
Did you ever freeze grapes?
No. But
there are some grapes with enough tannin problem that I wonder if you should do that.
Yeah, maybe that's true. But there's usually not too much problem getting grapes to give up their juice. Not like, if you ever try to press rhubarb, but freezing it just mushes out and the juice comes out. But the other deal with that is that there's a little color in the skins. It gives a little color to the juice. So I've made a lot of rhubarb wine too. So it's been a real interesting winemaking career for me, for many different reasons, I guess you'd call it. Not just vinifera, but all the rest of the other ones too. So.
I mean, in the vinifera world, in the grape world, you had all these other people in the wine industry who you could talk to, who you could help with marketing ideas and support research together. Did that exist in the fruit and berry world too? Because there were a number of other wineries making fruit and berry wine when you started.
Somewhat, but not nearly like the vinifera guys, I might call it, I'd say. No, it was pretty much everybody that were making fruit and berry wines were set in their ways. I'm going to do it my way. I got my recipe. That's going to way it is. And so, no, it was pretty.
It's an interesting dichotomy. I wonder why that was. But
right. No, there was very little cooperation in that.
Yeah.
Not like the vinifera guys, which Thank God I was one of them.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Anything else on your list?
I think that pretty well covers it, David.
Okay. Super.
It's been I was handed this list here of Willamette Valley 2017 Pinot Noir. Got a bunch of medals here for my I should say our Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. The last one is the Oregon Wine Competition. I got a gold medal on that sucker. So a couple, San Francisco Chronicle got a silver, and the Sunset International Wine Competition also got a silver. So there's some interesting stories about wine competitions. One of them that's kind of interesting, Harvey Schaefer from Schaefer Vineyard Cellars good buddy of mine, went to a lot of seminars together, etc. He was a grape grower and decided to make wine. And in '79, he was going to make his own wine, but he just finished building his winery. He was painting the inside, fell off the ladder, broke his leg. And so he called me and he said, "Ron," he said, "would you make my Pinot Noir for me?" I said, "Sure, really. Why not? Why not, Harvey?" So he brought his grapes over, and along with 10 Allier barrels, French oak barrels, brand new, we made the wine, put it in the new French oak. After about 10 months, Harvey came over and we tasted that wine, and my God, the oak was just overbearing, as you would know. I had about the same amount of Pinot Noir, so we did a blend, 50-50. He said, "Boy, that's really a nice wine." So we did the blend, and I even bottled the wine here. We split the wine, and I think a year later or so, we both entered that in the Oregon State Fair. I got a gold medal, he got a silver. The exact same wine. So you can believe in judging if you want. But
yeah, those judges know exactly what they're doing.
Harvey was not pleased.
Yeah, I bet he was not happy about that.
No, it's crazy. But anyhow, those are things you just never forget, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to drink to that.
You betcha. I'll drink to that too, David.
Thank you, Ron. Marj, thanks so much for coming in today and doing this with us. What I'm trying to figure out about Oak Knoll and about you is, how did it happen? I mean, the story of Oak Knoll is not like most of the other wineries.
No.
Ron grew up in Forest Grove. Where did you grow up?
Tillamook.
In Tillamook.
Land of trees, cheese, ocean breeze, and water up to your knees.
When you were growing up in Tillamook, did your family drink wine?
No, they didn't. No wine at all then. When I went to college, I went to Merrillhurst. I had my first introduction to wine, but it was more or less the sweeter type.
Yeah.
And then got married, and my children, 6 of them, came so fast. 6 children in a period of 7 years, so I was super,
I don't want to even do that now.
Super busy mother. So anyhow, how I became acquainted was with purchasing. Ron was involved in Tectronics with a group that would get wine from Europe, a wine club, and so we would get wine there and taste it. And then,
and would this group taste together?
No.
Everybody got wine.
They would have this list, and then you'd pick out what wine you wanted, and maybe 3 months later, 6 months later, the shipment would come in.
Got it.
So that was really my introduction to wine.
And particularly from Europe.
From Europe, yes. It was from all over. It wasn't just one country.
Right.
There was a group over, I think it was in Guernsey or somewhere over there, and they would be the ones that would get the list of wines available for us to pick the wines we wanted in the right price range and variety. So that's kind of how that went. But how we ourselves got involved in it, as I said, I had 6 children, and so I did a lot of canning, freezing, jam, jelly, relish, you name it. And so one day I said to Ron, "Why don't we make some wine?" And he looked at me like, "Wine? You kidding?" And I said, "Yes," because I figured when you do so much home preservation of fruits, berries, and stuff, wine was the next step. And so he says, "Oh, okay." So I combed about, I don't know how many different sources trying to get a recipe to make wine. This was back in the mid-'60s, and there just wasn't that much information. Everything that was an old English book or something. And but we did go to Jack and Ann McCallum at Wine Art in Portland, and that was our first introduction with books and how to do it. The Amateur Wine Club started up in 1967, 68 there, and we would meet at everybody's house once a month and compare stories. And I mean, like Dickie Rath was at one time involved, and well, Joe Coulombe, that has of course passed, he was involved, and there were a lot of them, and that wine club grew and grew. And then when we started the winery here, it met here every month, because it got so big that nobody's house could handle it. Then I think I must have had a premonition or something. So a year ago, I told them it was just time for them to find another meeting place. And
They were meeting up until a year ago here?
well, they're still meeting, but not here.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a different, Aloha Grange Hall, I think is where they're meeting now.
Wow.
But no, they met here for 50 years,
Oh my God.
or 49.
You were actually working for Wine Art at one
Yes,
point, right?
after we started making wine, Jack and Ann McCallum approached me and said, Marj, we want to open up a satellite store in Beaverton. Would you run it for us? And so I said, well, I guess, because I was really interested in the industry. And so that's how it came to be. And so until we really got going here, I ran it for a couple of years, and then, like I said, with 6 children and starting a winery and a few other things, I just told them it was too much. But during that time, they convinced, Ron taught a class for Portland Community College for 1 year. And then he looked at me and he says, this is not my cup of tea. And so I took over and I taught for a couple of years.
And was that wine making or wine appreciation?
Wine making, beginning, amateur, very beginning, because I don't claim to have the knowledge to go more than just the beginning. And so it would through Portland Community College, and it would be at Beaverton, Sunset, and Hillsborough high schools. And so I did that until it just got, there's only so many hours in a day, so.
Is it fair to say that a number of the people that are in the industry today, in essence, came through Oak Knoll or through you?
Through the Amateur Wine Club,
Yeah.
yes. It was Westside Wine Club. Now they changed their name to Portland Wine Club. Yes, like Raptor Ridge and Erath and, Coulombe and who else? Oh, there were just so many.
Yeah.
Too many, I don't want to leave anybody out.
Not really.
So I think I better stop. But no, a lot of them that were members here at one time or another.
The women involved with the wineries in Washington County became a power to be reckoned with. I mean, you had your own ideas, your own spirit, your own drive. What brought you together as this little group of, 5, 8?
Well, first of all, I look back, since I talked to you originally, there were 4 of us, first of all, and then two or three more. It was Nancy Ponzi, myself, Virginia Fuller, and Betty Coulombe. That was the first 4.
Wow.
And then Pat Mulhausen joined us, Corinne Gross joined us, and Linda Schaefer was here briefly. So that was the beginning.
When the 4 of you started meeting, what were you talking about? What was your thinking? What was...
Okay, we figured, if you got more than one person together, you had more manpower to speak, or woman power. And so we thought, how do we draw people out? And so over the years, there's a couple ways we did. We started the first barrel tasting, the theme of it being taste of wine before its time. And so
When do you think that started?
I have a picture that I showed earlier.
Yeah.
That was 1981 was when we did that. But I think we started meeting in the late 70s. I'm not sure of the date. I mean, it's a long time ago. So anyhow, we did the barrel tasting, and then we thought, we want to bring people together. So we'll do Thanksgiving holiday and a Memorial Day and things like that to bring people in. Christmas. So we did Passport to Wine Country, which has been used the name time and time again. We would have a passport, and if they'd go to 4 wineries and have their passports stamped, they would get, we did cork ornaments with our different emblems on there for our Christmas trees. So that's one way we did. And then we worked with the county trying to get a little more publicity from them. I was very, very active in the Hillsborough Chamber of Commerce and the Convention and Visitor Bureau of Washington County. And we worked together to, first of all, get our road paved here. It was paved in 1991 because so many people, tourists would come, and they didn't want to get their car dirty or dusty. And I don't know how many people would come and say, how come all the Oregon wineries are on these roads, dusty roads? And so that was that story. Then another thing we worked on was to get signage, because back then you just could not, if you put up a sign, the county would take it down. And so we were able to get our blue signs, highway signs. And so we just kind of worked together cooperatively, and then would have tastings together. And so we grew as a group.
As I've talked to people in Yamhill and Washington County, I realized that Washington County wineries were really looking at Portland as a market. And for whatever reasons, over Shayla Mountain on the other side in Yamhill County, yes, of course, we were thinking about it, but it was not so imminent, was not so immediate. And we were focused a little more out of state and whatever. But you guys invented, on this side, you invented consumer direct, tasting rooms, people...
Tasting rooms. Our first tasting room was actually right here.
That office right there.
Well, it's more or less, yes.
Yeah.
And so, definitely. And then, of course, when we put the other building on, we were able to expand it and do it. But our idea was never to impress the whole world. We wanted to be a local, friendly, welcoming winery to everybody. And so hopefully that's what we've succeeded over the years.
What kinds of things have you done to make that statement to the community?
Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I was so involved after Ron and I were divorced. Steve, my son Steve, told me, he says, Mom, you go join the Hillsborough Chamber of Commerce, get involved there. And I did, and I served on so many committees there. And it was with Shirley Huffman, who was our former mayor of Hillsborough. She was very, very helpful to get the word out. And every time they would have groups, people come in, they'd promote the wine, primarily us, because there weren't that many wineries in the Hillsborough area. And so that helped a lot. And then I was asked to join the visitor committee as a board member, and that even went wider spread because it encompassed a lot larger area. So I mean, I think with them backing me, it really helped tremendously. And you have to be part of your community. You just can't.
Well, you expand your ability to reach people by doing so.
Yes. Yeah. And I'd have so many tours groups come in, like groups from Japan, and they'd send them out here. Up until about, a year and a half ago, I did all the tours here at the winery. And I would work the tasting room and pour for our events, like the wine club that we started, the Oak Knoll Wine Club. I would pour at that. But then lately, and now with all the problems that are going on nationwide, I guess I'm officially retired. Although it just kind of breaks my heart, because when you have 50 years behind you and you know, and your children grew up in this.
Well, you're a walking history book to begin with.
Well, everybody says I should write a book. No, I'm not a writer, and I don't plan on doing that.
Well, you did bring some visual aids.
I did.
Tell us about the bottles, and there's something that I'm dying to try, but tell us about them first.
Well, this was our very first label, and this poor pathetic bottle, it's a 74 Pinot Noir. It's one of the first Pinots, and I'm not sure that it came from Adelsheim Vineyard, but it might have, because Ron...
I think that's what Ron said.
I think so, but this was our very first label, and it so happened that my sister-in-law and my brother designed it. So, I mean, this was really keeping it in the family.
Well, and everybody was broke, so we couldn't afford real designers, right?
That's it. And back then, we really didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And then we moved on to, I think, this label, and then this label, and then, no, this label.
Yep.
Which
that came, I mean, that was the really classic label in the 80s.
Yeah.
And going maybe into just the 90s.
But you've got to advance. I mean, you can't stay in the background forever.
Yeah.
So, anyhow. But I did open, to make sure it was still drinkable and not vinegar, our 1980 Pinot Noir that won the Governor's Trophy at the Oregon State Fair. In fact, that year we won both Governor's Trophies, the one for the fruit and berry and the one for the vinifera grape, and that was quite the day.
Yeah.
Yes, and so, yeah, I think Ron probably covered.
Well, he talked a little bit about it, but he didn't bring a bottle that we could try.
That's because he didn't hold on like I did.
He drank it.
That's a nice way of saying it. You better cut that. So you go ahead and try it and tell me what you think. I opened it, probably about...
Well, it smells...
Remember, 40 years.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm. Here's to you.
Cheers. Thanks for bringing...
50
Thanks
years.
for opening that. That's crazy.
Oh, well, like I said, Steve and I opened one a couple of weeks ago just to find out what it tasted like. And I might say Steve is one of my sons. I have 5 sons and a daughter. Son Ron is a winemaker down at Tudor Winery in California. John at one time was here. Now he's doing other things. Steve is president and CEO of Sake One in Forest Grove.
And was the president here for a big long time,
He was
too.
president here, yes. And then Dickie Rath wooed him away. And then when he went when San Michel bought out then he went on. You know, he had to move on.
This is in great shape.
Good.
It's amazing.
Anyhow,
40 years old.
Then moving on, son Tom was one time here, and then Doug is now officially winemaker at Wine by Joe over in Dundee. And my daughter Sarah, she did all sorts of stuff here, but now she's not involved at all.
Yeah. So we know that these kids did all this stuff with your winery and other wineries.
Yes.
What did you do? Is it genes, or did you
just
force them into
No, had a lot of
servitude,
love and patience.
So you didn't tell them that that's what they had to do in life?
Oh, only when we first started. You should see them hand labeling each bottle. That was pretty good. And it's so funny. My daughter was just starting first grade when we started the winery, and because she's the youngest of the 6. And prior to that, when we were making amateur wine and stuff, she would see the labels, and then we'd go to the store and she'd say, "Daddy's labels." So anyhow, but they were introduced from a young age because my 2 older were just in middle school, and so.
Yeah. They had a life before you had a winery, but not much of one.
One thing, after we started the winery, they were never bored, and they never said there's nothing to do.
Yeah, they probably quickly learned that was not a good idea.
That's true. So anyhow, I'm going to take a taste here. That's amazing for 40 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's incredible. I mean, you can tell it's old, but it's not over the hill.
Well, I'm telling you, I was really had my fingers crossed, holding my breath when that first bottle was open. And it's so funny, this cork here. Oh, I just broke it. Anyhow, Steve had a hard time getting the cork out, so that's why I opened it prior to bringing it, because I could just see it crumbling. And like I said, I just
yeah, they're pretty fragile at that age.
Yeah, at that age.
Yeah.
And I took one sip. He said, "Here, Mom, try it." I took one sip, and I said, "Steve, that's not bad." And so then he tried it. So, yeah.
Oak Knoll's founding and early direction was so tied to fruit and berry wine. Did that cause any problems or friction with the other wineries in Washington County, or?
They just didn't know how to handle us. But there were in the early days, not in Washington County, but there were, I guess at least 6 or so other ones.
Oh yeah.
We had a fruit and berry committee that would meet here too, periodically, like Paul Salone from Salone.
Oh, from Astoria.
Yeah, and Honeywood and the Wasson brothers. The reason we did that was because we wanted to make wine and we didn't have grapes available. We had planted grapes, but we're too low. We don't have the good air and frost drainage and everything. We used to have Pinot Noirs up here where they park sometimes now, and they just didn't do good. So we figured, okay, we got to wait till the grapes come into production and then purchase them from other people, and that's what we have done.
Yeah.
So.
No, and it seems to have made sense. Do you ever, over the years, did you ever wish that you had your own estate vineyard?
It would have been nice to, yes. But that would have involved so much more. And I know all of you wineries that have large vineyards and everything, you run the risk. Is it a good year? Is it a bad year? Are the birds going to come in? Are the rains going to come early? Or going to have the year of the green tomatoes, so to speak, when it comes to grapes? And so all that, this way, we kind of had a known product coming in that we didn't have to worry about, plus the manpower. That was a big thing too, and the expense. And the fruit and berry wines, definitely. Of course, we no longer make fruit and berry wines. We phased it out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The last one to go was our raspberry, our Frambrosia, but the berries got too spendy and everything, and we wanted to concentrate on the grapes.
When was that?
The last 2 years, I think the raspberry was the Frambrosia, the last to go. Prior to that, we had a Marionberry. Back in the early days, when we were making all sorts of fruit and berry wines, we made gooseberry and red currant and rhubarb and things like that in addition to the berry wines. And some of the doctors in Hillsborough got wind that we were making, with a second label, a gooseberry wine, the Gros Blanc. And so all their friends did not know it was made from gooseberries. They assumed it was a white wine because it sounded like it was a French wine or something. And that was a hit for a while for a lot of them from the common gooseberry.
The evolution of the wine business over the time that you've been part of it, how much of it was a surprise to you?
Well, I think when we got into it, we had no idea what was going. And then when you deal with the OLCC and the feds, I mean, they are so strict with their guidelines and everything, from the reports that you have to file, plus the label approval and all those things. We just didn't realize. Another thing with the local county, when we bought this property, it is zoned agricultural, so we had to get a variance so we could continue, even though we're using agricultural products here, And so we do have a lifetime variance on that. We had to go before the commissioners, I guess it was, to get that done. But I think when we started out, going from a home amateur one to a commercial, it's a big change, and you just don't know what to expect. And back in those days, we delivered a lot of the wine ourselves. We went to the different wine shops and stores, and I know that we were in Safeway at that time, and we'd take cases to the distribution center, and they in turn would move it on.
Around the state.
Move it around the state, yes. But then as time went on, and I know that I think most everybody has had the same problem, the bigger distributors gobbled up the smaller ones, and then the middle-sized ones, the larger companies came in, and they just don't have the interest and the time or desire to help the little guys.
Yeah. What would you, looking back over this longer period, what would you see as the contributions that specifically Oak Knoll made to the industry? I mean, a lot of what we all did was together, and that we can point to that, but because you're such a unique winery, and particularly in the early days, you were so neat,
yes.
so unique, what did Oak Knoll allow the wine industry to become because you had done it first?
Well, I think we put our heart and soul into this, and we were determined, and the winery became like another family. And then the winemakers that we associated with in the early days, everybody, if somebody needed something, your neighbor would be quick to, fill in and help you out. Because I know we crushed grapes for a few other wineries that were just starting because their press wasn't the right kind and this and that. And so as far as contribution, it's promoting the wine industry altogether, I think, because there wasn't one to begin with when we started, absolutely none.
Yep.
So I think that's a big thing. And as I mentioned earlier, being part of the community, because the community embraced us and they were so good to us.
One of the things that has struck me is that what you called the 4 women and the 6 women from Washington County wineries, you worked together from the beginning. Why did you join together? Why didn't you individually sell your wines, market your wines?
That's a good question. I think we thought that the more of us, the more clout we had. And we would meet in my living room once a month, until as time went on, it got bigger. Yeah. And then the gentlemen in the wine industry decided it was their turn to jump in, and it grew and encompassed a wider area. And so
I think in a very real way, you were demonstrating in the marketing world how collaboration worked.
It does. Yeah.
It's a pretty unique contribution that those 4 and then 6 women really added
to it,
to the whole industry.
Yes, I think we all had a common goal, and that was to promote our wines and Washington County wines at that point. So it's been an interesting 50 years. With the Washington County Winery Association, it was just joining together to not only be friends, but promote the local wines. And I think that was it. And do something to draw the public in so they would be aware that we existed, starting with the barrel tasting and then going on to the passport and the cork wine ornaments and things like that. It's so funny. We had our first birthday celebration for our 10-year anniversary, and that was the day Mount St. Helens blew.
Oh, wow.
So we had one heck of a big birthday candle go off. And it's so funny, back then one of the Bushes was running for, I can't remember which one, but Jeb Bush was supposed to come here, and NBC was supposed to follow him. All the press went to the mountain, but Jeb Bush did come here, and I gave him a tour right through the winery here. I do remember that. That's the only thing from our 10-year anniversary.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, so, yes.
I don't actually know when I first met the two of you.
I remember going to your old place and tasting, but gee, I can't put years with it. They sort of all go together. They really do.
Well, and I think, I mean, we were certainly thrown together at the Wine Growers Council of Oregon meetings, at the
all that,
Tiger.
and then tastings. And I remember going down to Roseburg, the greatest of the grape, every year. We do that. Go up to the Northwest Enological, judging in Seattle, and going over to Tri-Cities for, I can't think of the name of the, whatever the Tri-City.
Some sort of a wine competition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but people say, would you do it again? Well, I guess yes, but I think we'd be a little bit more knowledgeable second time around. But
well, in a certain sense, you have to wonder if any of us would have done it if we were more knowledgeable.
That's right. It'd be scary.
Yeah.
Yes, very scary.
I mean, particularly today, entering in today is such.
And the price of everything, you just couldn't afford it.
Right.
No. So.
And the idea of sort of financing everything out of cash flow and just barely making it on all fronts.
It definitely was.
I mean,
minimum rate.
How long did Ron and/or you work outside the winery after the winery was started?
I worked for about, maybe a year. Ron worked for about 2, because he was at Tektronix. He worked for about 2 years there. And it's so funny because we'd get stuff in, and of course we had to completely redo the building and all that. I don't know if he covered that.
No, not much.
But it had an old milk dairy barn, and it had stanchions and milk lines and vacuum lines and everything. We had to fill in the gutters and clean and everything. And then I would be receiving fruit when he was at work. It would be at night because he went on to swing shift toward the end, so he could work here during the daytime. And I was thinking, I didn't know all my neighbors that well. I wondered what the heck was going on. But so he worked a couple years after that, and then, like I said, we did our own distribution pretty much in the early years, and then
it sounds like even to Safeway for a while.
Yeah. And then it's so funny because Al Giusti was really big in the distributing business back then.
He was the biggest distributor then.
Yes, and all of a sudden people were saying, just let Oakno have this space. Well, he wooed us, and we ended up going with him, and of course then it passed hands several times after that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the wine industry, I mean, the different distributors became less and less.
Yeah, the number of distributors.
So, but 3 of my sons are still involved in winemaking, which is good. My nephew is too. You know Matt Vuylsteke? Yeah, Matt is my nephew. And I'm trying to think if there's any, but that's all the Vuylstekes that are.
Well, thank you for taking the time today. Thank you so much for opening this 1980. What a real treat. I'm so thankful that you were willing to be part of this and receive us here. Thanks, Marj.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. Like I said, I hope everything went okay.
Well, we'll see.
I don't have canned speeches. When I would give all the tours, I never knew what I was going to say, and you kind of geared it to what type of person, people there were, and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's just trying to remember and.
Well, I mean, since so much of Oakno was you.
Yeah, I guess,
It's. Kind of opening your mouth was revelatory.
Yeah. The early days, it was really scary, too. I remember Dan LeGrand from Channel 8 came out to interview me, and he stuck the mic in front of me, and of course, you know, naive and younger. Well, it started as a hobby, and my kids never let me forget that. So I hope I've progressed.